and I came across this study, and I just put the glass down, slowly, because what I was reading was the kind of thing that makes you question something you do dozens of times a day without thinking about it. The study was about microplastics, but not in the ocean, not in fish, not in the soil, in the brain. Human brains. And maybe yours. And definitely mine. Now, before we go any further, I want to be very upfront with you. This is not a panic video. I'm not here to tell you that you're doomed, or that plastic is going to kill us all, or that you need to buy 17 different filters and throw out everything in your kitchen. What I am here to do is walk you through what the science actually says, what the debate looks like right now, because there is a real, serious scientific debate happening, and why this topic exploded the way it did this week across every corner of the internet. Because something interesting happens when a piece of research touches something this personal. When it's about the ocean, it's terrible, but it's out there. When it's about fish, or packaging, or your water bottle, you feel a little uncomfortable, maybe you switch to glass for a week. But when it's about your brain, that's different. That lands somewhere else entirely. So let's start from the beginning. Plastic, as we know it, has only really been around since the mid-20th century. And in the span of what is, historically speaking, an absolute blink of an eye, we have saturated this planet with it. It's in the deepest ocean trenches. It's in Arctic ice. It's in the soil beneath forests that have never seen a road. It's in the air over cities, and it's in the air over mountains. It is, genuinely and without exaggeration, everywhere. And here's the thing about plastic that people don't always think about. It doesn't disappear. It doesn't break down the way an apple core breaks down, or the way wood breaks down. What it does is break up into smaller and smaller pieces. These tiny fragments, anything under 5 millimeters, are what we call microplastics. And below that, even smaller, we have nanoplastics. Particles so microscopic that they can slip through biological barriers that most things can't. For years, the conversation around microplastics was largely focused on marine life and the food chain. Whales with plastic in their stomachs, fish ingesting fragments, shellfish accumulating particles. And then, slowly, and then all at once, researchers started turning their attention to what this might mean for humans. We started finding microplastics in human stool, which was alarming but somewhat expected. We found them in blood, which was more concerning. We found them in lungs, in placentas, in the tissue that connects a mother to her unborn child, and in breast milk. And then, last year and into this year, researchers started publishing findings about microplastics in one more place. The brain. Now, when I say the brain, I don't want you to gloss over that. Because your brain is not just another organ. It is the most protected organ in your body. Evolution spent millions of years building a fortress around it. There's a structure called the blood-brain barrier, and if you haven't heard of it, it's essentially a highly selective filter that surrounds the brain's blood vessels. Its whole job is to decide what gets in and what doesn't. Large molecules? No. Pathogens? Blocked. Most drugs, which is why treating brain diseases is so notoriously difficult, often can't get through. And yet, nanoplastics appear to be crossing it. The research here is still developing, but what scientists have found is genuinely striking. When they look at brain tissue, in studies done on animals and in post-mortem human tissue analysis, they are finding microplastic and nanoplastic particles accumulating there. And not in trivial amounts. Some analyses found concentrations that were higher in brain tissue than in other organs they examined. The question that immediately follows is, okay, so they're there. But what are they doing? And this is where it gets complicated. And fascinating. And a little scary. There are several biological pathways researchers are investigating when it comes to how microplastics might affect brain function. Let me walk you through them, because I think once you understand the mechanisms, or the proposed mechanisms, I should say, the concern starts to make a lot more sense. The first is inflammation. You've probably heard a lot about inflammation in health contexts, because it shows up in the story of almost every chronic disease. Inflammation is your immune system's response to a perceived threat. It's how your body fights infection, heals wounds, deals with damage. The problem is when it becomes chronic, when it's triggered repeatedly or constantly, even by things that aren't actually infectious, it starts doing damage of its own. Microplastics appear to trigger inflammation. When these foreign particles enter tissue, the immune cells in that tissue recognize them as something that shouldn't be there and mount a response. In the brain, this process involves a specific type of immune cell called microglia. Microglia are the brain's resident immune cells. Their job is to protect neural tissue. But when they're chronically activated by something like an accumulating foreign particle, they can start damaging the very neurons they're supposed to protect. This is one of the pathways researchers are pointing to. Chronic neuroinflammation driven by plastic particles. And why does that matter? Because neuroinflammation is one of the hallmarks, one of the consistently observed features of neurodegenerative diseases. Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease. These conditions are deeply complex, and no one is claiming plastic causes them outright. But the overlap in mechanism is what has researchers paying very close attention. The second pathway involves that blood-brain barrier I mentioned. Beyond just passing through it, there's concern that microplastics could weaken it. The integrity of the blood-brain barrier is essential. When it's compromised, things that would normally be kept out can get in. Toxins, pathogens, inflammatory molecules. Studies have suggested that exposure to certain microplastics can reduce the expression of proteins that hold the barrier's cells tightly together. If the barrier becomes more porous, the brain becomes more vulnerable to a whole cascade of problems. And the third pathway, and this one I find particularly interesting, has to do with energy. Neurons are extraordinarily energy-hungry cells. They need a constant, reliable supply of cellular energy to function. The mitochondria in neurons, the little structures that produce that energy, appear to be sensitive to microplastic exposure. Some research suggests that nanoplastics can interfere with mitochondrial function, essentially disrupting the energy supply to brain cells. A neuron that's energy-starved doesn't function well, and over time, it may not survive. Again, proposed mechanisms, early research, ongoing investigation. But the pathways are biologically plausible. They make sense. And that's why scientists are taking this seriously. Now here's where I want to bring in the other side of this, because I said at the beginning that there's a real scientific debate here, and I meant it, and I think it's important. Not everyone looks at this emerging body of research and sees a clear alarm. There are credible scientists, serious researchers with serious credentials, who are raising their hands and saying, wait. Let's be careful here. A group of researchers at the University of Padua in Italy published a critical analysis of the methodology used in some of the key studies on microplastics in human tissue. And their concerns weren't fringe objections, they were methodological. How were samples collected? Could they have been contaminated during processing? Are the analytical techniques being used accurate enough to distinguish genuine tissue-embedded particles from environmental contamination that happened in the lab? These are fair questions. They're the kinds of questions good science is supposed to ask. One expert quoted in the scientific literature put it plainly, the evidence does not yet justify definitive claims about microplastics in the human brain or their health effects. And that's not a pro-plastic position. That's not someone saying microplastics are harmless. That's someone saying, the science isn't mature enough yet to know, and we should say so honestly. And I think this tension between the researchers who are genuinely alarmed by what they're seeing and the researchers who are urging methodological caution is actually really important to understand, because it reflects how science actually works. It's not a single unanimous verdict that gets handed down. It's a process. It's iterative. It's messy. And it sometimes takes years or decades before a clear consensus emerges. The history of environmental health science is full of moments like this. The debate over lead in paint and gasoline went on for decades before the science was definitive enough to drive policy. The research on cigarettes and lung cancer took time to build to the point where it was irrefutable. That doesn't mean we wait until something is proven beyond all doubt before we take any precautions. But it does mean we should be careful about reading early-stage research as settled fact. So where does that leave us with microplastics in the brain? Honestly, in a genuinely uncertain place. And I know that's not the satisfying conclusion people were hoping for. What we know, microplastic and nanoplastic particles have been detected in human brain tissue. This is not disputed. What remains under investigation is the accuracy and methodology of those measurements, the long-term health implications, the dose-response relationship, meaning how much exposure translates to how much harm, and whether the biological mechanisms that have been identified in lab settings and animal models translate meaningfully to real-world human health outcomes. What we can say with reasonable confidence, this is not nothing. The volume of research pointing in this direction is significant enough that major research institutions are taking it seriously. The World Health Organization has flagged microplastics as an area requiring urgent research. National health agencies in multiple countries are funding studies. This isn't a fringe concern being amplified by social media. The social media amplification is happening because the underlying science is real and is generating genuine concern among credible researchers. What we can also say, we don't have enough information yet to quantify the risk. The estimate that adults may be consuming around 250 grams of microplastic particles per year, that figure has made the rounds and it sounds alarming. And it is significant. But what we don't yet know is how much of that accumulates where, how much the body is able to clear, and what the threshold for harm might be. These are the questions being actively worked on right now. So, I want to zoom out for a second because I think there's a bigger conversation embedded in all of this. We've built a civilization on plastic. It's in our food packaging and our medical devices and our clothing and our cars and our electronics and our water infrastructure. It's woven into the fabric of modern life so completely that the idea of meaningfully reducing our exposure feels, to a lot of people, not just difficult but essentially impossible. And I think that's part of why this particular topic hits so hard when it goes viral, because it raises a question that we don't have a good cultural framework for answering. We're not talking about a choice you can simply opt out of. You can switch to a glass water bottle. You can buy a better filter. You can choose products with less plastic packaging. And those choices matter, individually. And I'm not dismissing them, but the microplastics already in the environment, in the air, in the rain, in the food chain, those aren't going anywhere. On any timeline that's relevant to your health or mine. Which puts us in a position that modern people find deeply uncomfortable, genuine uncertainty about something we cannot control. And the response to that discomfort, predictably, splits into two camps. One camp catastrophizes, microplastics are going to cause a wave of neurodegeneration, civilization is poisoning itself, we're all doomed. The other camp dismisses, this is overblown fear-mongering. The research is weak, everything causes cancer these days, don't worry about it. And the actual answer, as usual, lives somewhere in the middle. In the uncomfortable, uncertain, ongoing space of, this is a real concern, the science is developing, we should fund more research, we should take reasonable precautions, and we should probably also think seriously as a society about our relationship with plastic. There's something almost poetic, in a grim way, about the possibility that the synthetic material we created for convenience, that we wrapped our food in and built our infrastructure around, and produced in quantities that have literally changed the geological record of this planet, may have found its way into the most complex structure in the known universe. The human brain, the organ responsible for every thought, every memory, every experience you've ever had. I don't say that to be dramatic. I say it because I think it captures something real about the moment we're in. We are living with the consequences of decisions made before we fully understood what we were doing. And we're now in the position of trying to understand those consequences while they're actively unfolding. That's hard. That's uncomfortable. but it's also the honest situation. So let me land this somewhere useful, because I don't want to leave you just sitting with dread. If you want to take reasonable steps to reduce your microplastic exposure, and the research, even in its current state, suggests it's not unreasonable to want to, there are a few things that have some evidence behind them. Filtering your drinking water with a high-quality filter does reduce particle load. Avoiding heating food in plastic containers reduces the amount that leaches into your food. Reducing your consumption of heavily processed and packaged foods helps. Ventilating your home and reducing indoor dust accumulation matters, because household dust is a significant source of microplastic exposure that most people don't think about. These aren't revolutionary changes. They're modest adjustments that come with essentially no downside, even if the ultimate science turns out to be less alarming than the current studies suggest. And beyond personal choices, pay attention to this research as it develops. Follow the scientists who are working on this, read past the headlines, and support the idea that we should be funding serious, rigorous long-term studies on this question. Because the only way we move from early-stage concern to definitive understanding is through exactly that. More research, done carefully, over time. The conversation